Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known in this realm as Jaime and Fuego, back for another episode here on the horror show of Hail to Stephen King. So thank you very, very much for joining. And yeah, it's been interesting build-up of the summer for King with everybody anticipating The Dark Tower like myself and then being so supremely disappointed. And then in turn, we're still hoping, fingers firmly crossed, that it is going to be the shiznitto-bam, snip, snap, snit. And we've also got Sleeping Beauties coming. The Mist was terrible, but Mr. Mercedes is going tremendously thus far. Just FYI, that adaptation, which is on the Audience AT&T network, is actually free to watch the first 2 episodes, at least for a limited time. So I would say jump on StephenKing.com. They've got links to it there. Brendan Gleeson is doing such a fantastic job. Harry Treadaway too. Marsha Parker and I are actually planning a full review of the first Mr. Mercedes book in the Bill Hodges trilogy and our impressions on the first 2 episodes of the show. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming very soon. But the topic today, since I have finally finished all of the Stephen King short stories. So I jumped ahead a little bit and I started reading a lot of Bizarre of Bad Dreams before I was done with Mr. Mercedes, before I started rereading it as we anticipate that film. And I'm actually like 400 pages into it. I was just reading the second interlude where we're hearing about the black spot and how that all went down, and the Dick Halloran surprise appearance and all that cool stuff. So yeah, I'm marching through that. You're going to see a retro review of that book probably from Marsha and myself as well. So I'm having such a great time rereading it right now, guys. It is... Yeah, I think I've talked about this on the show before where I'm like, it fluctuates. My 3 favorites are easily and always eternally going to be, unless something blows me out of the water, you know, it's going to be It, it's going to be Pet Sematary, and it's going to be The Stand. And they have, over the course of my 7-8 years of reading through all of these, you know, starting with Carrie and working book by book over the last, almost 8 years, those 3 have still maintained their favoritesness, but they kind of fluctuate in between which one I would consider a top one. So that's why I can't really say any are my personal favorite, but they are the top 3 is set, so to speak. And just going back and hanging with the Losers Club, I'm having such a great time. But this is a very different beast. So between The Stand and It being the 2 largest books King has ever written, you know, Under the Dome is a close third, 1122 is a monster, The Tommyknockers is a monster. King is often known for having books that are the length of, a paperweight, or, you know, something to prop your door open with, or whatever. But he writes fantastic short stories, like incredibly just... It's almost kind of a nice change of pace with him when you read his short collections, like, Night Shift and Skeleton Crew and Everything's Eventual and Nightmares and Dreamscapes, Just After Sunset, Bizarre Bad Dreams, because of the fact that King does have a tendency to meander sometimes. We know this to be true if you've read a lot of his stuff, and it really makes you appreciate the characters a lot more a lot of the time, especially if they end up dying in some terrible fashion. But there is something to say for the fact that the man is versatile enough to actually do something condensed, to the point, and hopefully scary. And so the viewer questions that I'm going to be factoring into this particular episode entail my favorite Stephen King short stories. And so first off, I had Pritam Das, and he had asked, hey man, what are some of Stephen King's best short story books? And if I was to say that, my 2 favorites are most definitely his first one and then kind of his short story resurgence one. So the first one would definitely be this one that sits on my shelf, and it was one of the first King books that I ever read, Night Shift. I've also got the original hardcover there too, but this is where King was really mixing the sci-fi with the horror, and he also had some weird true crime stuff going on. It's a very awesome smattering of different things and the different styles that in the mid to early 70s King was all about, because this actually collects a lot of stuff that he published before Carrie hit and before he did Salem's Lot and before he did The Stand and really got his career roaring. But Second one is unfortunately on loan, as I realized as I was about to film this video, and I was like, damn it, well, it is what it is. But Just After Sunset for me, if I was to go with top two, because I couldn't really decide on a third one, you know, as I gave it contemplation, but Just After Sunset is where that King just, it was after 9/11, and you can really just feel the new state of the world in the storytelling in that book. A lot of the stuff has to do with people dying in terrorist attacks and so on and so forth. So yeah, that will be factored in to the rest of this episode though, because the main question comes from Mr. Seth Fisher. He says, love the show. My question is top 3 or 5 short stories that scared you the most. And these won't necessarily be the ones that scared me the most, but they'll be the ones that left me with an oddly unsettling feeling, and where I just, you know, when you read a short story, or, well, yeah, and often is a short story where you read and it's usually read in one sitting. I always like to read a short story in one sitting, you know, whether it's 15 or, you know, 50 pages or whatever. So one sitting, straight through. You're just sitting there, and then when you get done with it, you're just like, wow. And it just really just sits with you, and obviously novels have that resounding ability to do so. It is definitely one of them, especially, you know, where, you know, Bill is riding against the devil that final time and stuff, you know, with his wife and all that. And I mean, great books, they take their time, you know, great novels, I should say specifically, but there is something to a good short story. It's like almost like, it's like a sprinter, you know, somebody who does like a sprint instead of a marathon. And so, I mean, you can just be impressed with those bursts of energy and stuff, as opposed to a sustained bit of... Anyway, enough with the euphemisms, enough with the analogies. Let's get into it. I am basically going to go book by book real quick, and I'm not going to go 3 or 5, because with short stories, come on guys, there is so much to talk about, especially with all of King's tomes, that I got to go 10. I have to. I really thought about going to 11, and who knows, maybe I'll do an 11th honorable mention or something, because I have an extensive list here. But nonetheless, one stipulation I am going to mention is the fact that I chose all short stories. I did not choose novellas. Now, King has had some amazing collections of novellas, which are pretty much stuff that could be released as their own, and have been in some cases, like The Mist, which was the novella that started Skeleton Crew. That would have definitely been in this, but once again, it was, I mean, if it's in the close to 100-page range or something, I just, you know, so just to let you purists know, nothing from Different Seasons is on this, nothing from 4 Past Midnight is on this, nothing from Full Dark No Stars is going to be on this, which I actually just realized is down there. So nothing from the novella collections, which also will include Hearts in Atlantis, because I love the title story in that, where the kids get addicted to playing hearts in college, and damn, it's great. But so that's the stipulations, just so you know right off the bat, if some of your favorite you know, selections aren't there, they might be novellas, at least in King's distinction in his estimation. So let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the one that started off his collected short story release work, which is actually going to be the next thing that Cemetery Dance is releasing. I always give Cemetery Dance a shout out when I can, because I buy pretty much everything Stephen King that they do. Chismar, you just shizzle, yo. Awesome work with this company and with all of your King Deluxe releases and various other things too. The release of that is coming next year. Woohoo! I've already pre-ordered my copy. It's gonna be big, fat deluxe edition, illustrated, like the It Special Edition, and as you know, Cemetery Dance also adapted a lot of stuff from Night Shift in the Secretary of Dreams collections. So, first one that I gotta give a shout out to, number 1, and these are in no particular order since I'm going, you know, release by release. I gotta talk about Jerusalem's Lot. Jerusalem's Lot is basically a prequel of sorts, but a loose prequel to Salem's Lot, and it's about this guy who moves into the aforementioned house, which houses Barlow and all that in the story proper, but there's already an evil presence there, you know, like decades and decades before. It's either 18 or 1700s. It's been a while since I've read it, so forgive me for not getting that particular fact right, but the essence of the story, which owes a lot, according to many, to Mr. Lovecraft, is the fact that it's about growing insanity, which is something that we see in a lot of King stories, which I love, like Pet Sematary, for instance. But it's also about this guy, like, just being under the impression he's hearing, like, rats in the walls, and, you know, just his descent into madness after moving into this house, and how it affects him and what it does to him is just supremely creepy, and it's one of my favorite short stories. It definitely beats out One for the Road for the sheer fact that One for the Road is more like an aftermath of, is there still vampires in, you know, in the lot and what's going on there, but just the internal dialogue of the descent into madness, it really, for me, sowed the seeds for what you would eventually see in all of the weird internalization that went down with Dr. Creed and Pet Sematary, and, you know, his battle cries of "Hey ho, let's go" and everything. Night Shift might be my favorite of the King stuff because it's early, raw King and so awesome, and Jerusalem's Lot is actually the first entry in there. They did a great job with it in Secretary of Dreams. So number 2 is also, I'm not number 2! Yes, unfortunately, you're number 2, but in no particular order. Gray Matter, which Gray Matter is a very strange little story about this, you know, slightly abusive father, alcoholic, sends him, like, he's so faded all the time that he's sending his son out to get his beer for him. And lo and behold, this super cheap, like, we're talking, like, even below Pabst and Busch and all of these bargain brands, like, we're talking weird off-brand that you probably never heard of and was in all likelihood invented for this particular story. But imagine one of those cans, you know, because with the fermentation of the yeast and just that weird kind of decay that's involved with even making alcohol of any kind, the rotting process. So this guy gets a 6-pack or whatever, you know, a case of beer one day that his son goes out to get for him. And he takes a look at this can, and it's got like a gray sliminess on the top. Almost like, you know, the can was maybe cracked just to the slightest degree, so it rotted even more so, perhaps. And this guy's so much of a, like, you know, drunkoid that he's just like, well, I'll still drink it anyway, blah, blah, blah. And then he starts to change, and I don't really want to mention more beyond that, because it's like when they visualized it in Secretary of Dreams, I think it was the second one, if I'm not mistaken, what happens to this guy is it's very interesting. You guys all know that I like the Blob and the Stuff and things of that nature, so it's gross, and it's one of my favorite Stephen King short stories ever. As you can tell, we're going to kind of rapid fire through these because there's a lot to talk about, and because since they're short stories, I don't want to tell you the whole damn short story. I want you to actually go out, seek out these collections, go to your local bookstore, go to Amazon if you need to go corporate to get it for cheaper and easier, whatever it may be, obtain these. Another entry from Night Shift, which is the third one that we're going to mention here. It's called actually no, it is not from Night Shift. I'm mistaken. This is actually our first entry from Skeleton Crew, and this is called The Raft. And The Raft was amazingly adapted in Creepshow 2. It's actually, between the first 2 Creepshow movies, my favorite installment, my favorite segment in all of those anthologies, you know, in both parts. And let's include Tales from the Dark Side too, which people call kind of the pseudo-spiritual sequel to that, even though only one segment was actually a King adaptation. But that is beside the point. The Raft is about these 4 peeps, these 2 guys and 2 girls, who go out on a small little lake, you know, and it's probably somewhere in Maine or New England. You know how King does things. I can't remember that detail. But they encounter on this little, like, raft, which is out in the middle of the lake. When they go, you know, they've swam around for a little bit, and they want to, you know, just catch some rays, and, you know, I think they've got some beer with them or something. I might be wrong about that, but because it's been a while since I've watched it. But the biggest and most important detail is the fact that there is a black, like, oil slick, which they see on the lake and which actually comes over to them and basically terrorizes them. People die. They did such a great job with the practical in Creepshow 2. The other 2 segments in Creepshow 2 with the hitchhiker and with the wooden Indian were kind of crappy in my opinion. But this one was on point. It's gruesome. It's really interesting because they ended a little bit different in the short story, but they both have their merits. I actually like both of the endings. There's more of like a weird psychedelic tripped out aspect to the end of The Raft in the 70s, you know, short story, but then in the 80s, you know, bit, there's something that happens with this swimmer when he gets back to shore, which is great, man, I must say. And then there's a funny little like joke at the end. So yeah, I cannot recommend Creepshow 2's segment The Raft at least enough, and also seeking out Skeleton Crew, so you guys can check out that short. It's great. It's great. Next up, our fourth entry is going to be The Reach, and The Reach is actually the last story in Skeleton Crew, also adapted for Secretary of Dreams, and this is more gothic, kind of, not so much horror, but just gothic in the nature of the fact that it's really beautifully sad, you know? It's about this woman. She's turning 95 years old. She's aware that she has terminal cancer and doesn't want to tell anybody about it. And she has lived on this self-sustaining island for her entire life, nearly a century. And so she's never been off the island, and people have implored her many times, family members, friends, whatever. And she's like, I have everything here that I need. Why should I have to leave? And she never did. But yet, and she knows she's at the end of the road, and the end of the line, you know, as the offspring would say, whoa! Sorry. But when she realizes she's there, she's like, maybe this is the time for me, you know, when the water is frozen over here and I'm at the end of my life, for me to actually walk to the mainland for the first time. And when she's walking across the mainland, she sees, it's got a very similar vibe to A Face in the Crowd, which is a great short story that King wrote with Stephen Onan, or Stuart Onan, if I'm not mistaken, the guy that he did Faithful with, the Boston Red Sox chronicle of their season when they finally won their first World Series, and whoever knows how long, but it's just the fact that she's almost like seeing all of the familiar faces as she's crossing over, and they find, well, you know, I'm not going to say anything beyond that. Once again, these are stories that I want to talk more about, but I just can't because I can't reveal too much. So the story is just basically about her finally deciding to cross over this frozen reach of ice, and she is basically, you know, seeing all those familiar faces, from friends to her deceased husband, and it's beautiful and it's sad and so good, so good. Anyway. Let's get to the fifth story, which is where we're finally crossing into Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which is King's biggest collection of short stories, and I must say this one and Everything's Eventual are my two least favorites of his collections, and that's not to say that there aren't gems in there. There are great stories in both, but Nightmares and Dreamscapes was where I feel like King, he was just starting to get sober. It was about the time that he was writing, you know, stuff like you know, Rose Madder and you know, Misery, Dolores Claiborne, things of that nature. He was closing the book on all the Castle Rock, you know, correlating and connecting stuff. And so I actually have one of the last Castle Rock stories here, which is an epilogue kind of to Needful Things, which is really good, but that's definitely not on my list. That story's just okay. But I gotta talk about Crouch End, and this is actually one that people have mentioned in the comments before. Crouch End is another worshipping at the altar of Lovecraft story, and even though King credits Richard Matheson as his #1 influence, you can't deny the fact that Poe and Lovecraft had a big, especially with a lot of the interdimensional stuff that he got in with the Dark Tower stuff and with thinnies and overlapping dimensions, and that's essentially what this is all about. This is about a woman, American woman, who is in a kind of, I guess, suburb of sorts of London called Crouch End, and her husband is looking at this job opportunity and trying to find this guy's particular you know, residence, and it almost feels like this place is a thinny, which in Stephen King terminology is where it's a thin place where different alternate realities are overlapping. And so there have been many stories from what this older cop, or older London Yard, or Scotland Yard guy, I should say, is telling this younger recruit. And he's like, oh, there's been a lot of bad stories in that Crouch End place, and, you know, disappearances and weird things. Something happens to her husband, she freaks out and goes to report it to, you know, the authorities, and big Lovecraft vibe in this one. It's easily, it was, I mean, when I was thinking about my top Stephen King stories, this was one of the first few that just instantaneously popped into my mind. They also did a great adaptation with Claire Forlani, I believe her name was. She was Brandy in Mallrats, and she's I think she was in Meet Joe Black. She's a babe. She's a great actress, and she plays in the they did that anthology called Nightmares and Dreamscapes, where they didn't just adapt from that particular collection of short stories. They picked and chose, you know, from Everything's Eventual and from, you know, Skeleton Crew and various others and stuff. And so that, while some of the adaptations weren't so good because not all of King's short stories are that good, Crouch End was one of the best ones. So definitely go and seek that out, guys. Next up, we have another one from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which I'm mad this still hasn't been adapted. Although, when you see some of the connections to pre-existing material, maybe that's why it hasn't happened. So, it's called The 10 O'Clock People. And Tom Holland, who directed Child's Play and Fright Night, he is still, and he also did Thinner. He is still apparently working on this film, which has been retitled Cessation. But here's the premise. So, essentially, people get addicted to nicotine. Smoker. I was a long-time smoker, unfortunately. Glad that I kicked the habit. But nonetheless, almost like in 1408, where it's like a smoker is a smoker when the chips are down, it's a really tough habit to quit. And so the 10 o'clock people are basically the people who go and smoke cigarettes in you know, these offices and stuff all over the world, but specifically for the story here in Boston, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall correctly. And so when you're kind of getting off the nicotine and there's just like trace amounts in your system, you can see things that other people cannot see. So imagine if you've got trace nicotine in your system, it's like putting the sunglasses on and they live. And you look around the world and you look around at all of the people that surround you and you see that not all of them are what they seem to be. They're actually like Batman, as I think he calls them in the short story, but they're basically almost like Cantoy, like Taheen from the Dark Tower stories, where, you know, they've got a fake face on, but in all reality, they are in fact crazy creatures trying to take over the world. One of them is a person of big time power, and this guy meets another dude who, you know, was out there smoking one day, who sees his reaction when he first realizes this, when he's trying to quit smoking, and he takes him to a special, you know, trying to quit smoking meeting, which is actually about all these people who know that there's, you know, these evil, you know, masked whatevers in positions of power all across the planet. And this needs to be a movie. It really does, especially with some of the crazy lengths that King actually pushes the story to, with when these people decide to go after the 10 o'clock people, as they grow to call them. This story is killer, dude. I love the 10 o'clock people from Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Cannot recommend it enough. So the next one is my only selection from Everything's Eventual. Now, I love Little Sisters of Illyria. I love the title book. I love, I believe, was 1408 in there as well? Yes, it was. That was a great adaptation with John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. But nonetheless, this is my favorite story from the entire collection because of the fact that it's got almost like a very... It's in some ways what I think Wendy's Button Box should have been. So it's about a young kid basically encountering the devil in a very weird situation, and it's called The Man in the Black Suit, if I had not said that already. And this kid's just out fishing, you know, hanging out, doing his thing, and this dude who smells like charred, burnt, you know, just, yeah, from hell, man, that's where I live. This dude walks up to him by the stream where he's fishing at and starts just telling him all kinds of horrible things, trying to scare the crap out of him, stuff that this boy doesn't necessarily think is true, which I don't want to divulge because that would be spoilery. And then he proceeds to threaten him, and it's just him trying to escape, you know, through like the little serene forest area from this guy. And I think they did a Dollar Baby for this, which is where King options the rights for $1, and it's aspiring filmmakers and stuff. And I think this was way back in like the early 2000s, but nonetheless, it's a scary story. Seriously, the stuff that he says to this kid, it's very reminiscent, in my opinion, of the stuff that the people, when they come back from that background, you know, the Micmac battlegrounds in Pet Sematary, like the kind of exorcist status stuff that was said by those resurrected characters. It's really similar to that, but imagine if it's like the head honcho of those from the dark burning depths of hell. It's It's a great story, man, and easily the best from Everything's Eventual, which I will actually throw out here right now as I've been contemplating with this. It's my least favorite of Stephen King's collected shorts. Sorry. Next up is shifting into where King found his stride, and I mentioned it at the very beginning of the video. Just after sunset, 9/11 did something to a lot of people, and it made them think about different sorts of horrors. And the first one that I want to mention from Just After Sunset is the very first one, actually, called Willa, which the reason I lent this book to a lady friend of mine is the fact that I think it's one of the most romantic, spooky stories that I've ever read, and I can't reveal the twist, but it's essentially about, estranged lovers finding each other again. And this is one. There's basically a bunch of people at a train station, and this guy's lady goes missing, and he's like, I can't wait for the train without her. I can't leave without her, and so he goes out into this town to see where she is, and I'm a hopeless romantic, at the end of the day, truly and fully, and it's such a beautiful story. I think it's one of the most beautiful things Stephen King has ever written. It's up there with The Reach for me as far as just gothic and not necessarily scary, but just unsettling, and what really just makes you think, think about the nature of love and about the short time that we have and stuff like that. So the next one is a story that is also from Just After Sunset, which I've mentioned before, and I actually talked about it on the last episode of the comic books. It's called N, simply N. And they did a great comic about it, which is right here on the shelf that Marvel did. They did it as a web series, which is basically like a web motion comic that you can find on iTunes. Stephen King N, search that. But just basically think about the contagious nature of insanity and how a therapist can just have a seed planted from somebody that he's talking with, and how he can just go seeking out the answers that his patient couldn't find, and how it just grows and can be passed on. I talked extensively about it during the last episode. Please check that out. I talked at length about N, watch my full Stephen King comic list, and that might be one of the scariest King stories I've ever read, as far as just pure scares. And like when people in the first person are basically trying to justify doing crazy ass things that you as the reader, a normal sane person, makes donuts of sense to, that is some of the scariest stuff for me. Because true insanity is where you think that what you're doing is totally logical, right? Yeah, that's the definition of insanity. When to everybody else, they're looking at you, they're like, what is this guy doing? But hey, isn't that how some of the most brilliant minds thought outside the box? The Einsteins, the Teslas, the whatevers, man. They were the ones who, they didn't think conventionally. So yeah, maybe brilliance and crazy kind of intertwine and kind of overlap a little bit. So now we are moving on to the final entry here, the 10th mention, and I'm gonna rattle off some honorables as well here at the end, but it's the only mention from The Bizarre Bad Dreams, and I also talked about this last week because it's so damn good. It's called The Little Green God of Agony. They did a Stephen King comic on his website, so if you go to stephenking.com, I think there's like 32 different slides, so it's about, your standard comic, and I wish they would release this in a standard form. But The Little Green God of Agony is about this woman who is being paid to go and be the caretaker for this super rich guy who was in a plane crash, almost dies, and he has not been able to heal from his wounds, and a special healer is called in to basically, it's almost like an exorcism slash kind of, I don't know. He insists that the reason he can't heal properly and, be able to walk again and actually get through this is not because of unwillingness to rehab properly or, put the work in or whatever. This guy insists, much to the skepticism of this caretaker woman, that he's possessed by something, and it's a creature, it's a demon, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not going to reveal if that is true or if that's false, but you get some very interesting just internal dialogue from this woman, and the climax is great. It is very, very interesting and not what you would necessarily expect. Certainly not what I expected. So there you have it, guys. Those are my 10 favorites. The 11th would probably be another one from Night Shift, which is, I have written on here, Sometimes They Come Back. It's a story about this guy whose younger brother is killed by some like crappy greaser, you know, dudes back in the 50s. And then decades later, when he goes to take on a replacement teaching job as an English teacher, if I'm not mistaken, students start dying and they are being replaced in the classroom by these same kids who he remembers from back in the 50s. And they adapted it as a TV, I don't think it was a miniseries, I think it was just a TV movie. It was originally supposed to be part of Cat's Eye, which was, for me, one of the weakest Stephen King anthology adaptations. But nonetheless, when these kids start showing up in the short story, he goes to some way more messed up means to deal with them, so to speak. The TV movie is actually a very solid adaptation, but certain character motivations are softened around the edges, I guess you could say, and some of the more messed up stuff in the book doesn't, or in the short story, doesn't necessarily happen. So yeah, if I was gonna crank this to 11, yeah, it would be Sometimes They Come Back. But others I have to just rattle off. If we're doing a quick lightning round, I Am the Doorway is a killer one about, it's also from Night Shift. It's about this guy who goes to investigate Venus, and there's like alien, almost like tissue or some sort of weird, I don't know, spores that he comes into contact with, and that's actually what this cover is all about, because like he gets eyeballs like popping up on his hands and it's crazy. Also on Night Shift you've got Night Surf, which is a prequel to The Stand and kind of like an offshoot short story of people dealing with the virus when it first breaks out. We've also got Children of the Corn on there, which I love the short story so much more than the Linda Hamilton one, and because the sci-fi adaptation was a little bit more faithful in the spirit of the ending to the short story, I actually like that one better, surprisingly. Yeah, how about that, guys? If we're gonna jump to Skeleton Crew next, Mrs. Todd's Shortcut is fantastic. That's about this woman who driving like weird back roads in Maine and almost going through like crazy portals. Nona is good. That actually has Ace Merrill, who is in, boy, he's in The Body, he's in Needful Things. It's about this dude who picks up this crazy hitchhiker chick and they go to a mortuary, and yeah, it's very strange. Grandma is also crazy, about this guy who thinks his grandma, who's on her deathbed, is like the absolute epitome of evil. Can't say much beyond that. The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands is a story that takes place at this club, which is in a few different King short stories, and I'm sad that he kind of neglected it and hasn't returned to it, because the breathing method took place at this club. It's basically, I can't recall the name of it or if they ever even distinguished it with one, but it's like super high white collar, you know, or maybe white collar's not even the proper term, but basically like elite businessmen like lounge to go drink and tell crazy stories, and it's about this guy. It's called The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands, and refuses to shake hands with people because he thinks when he shakes hands with people they end up dying. It's nuts. Another couple from Nightmares and Dreamscapes in the lightning round, The Night Flyer. Great adaptation with Miguel Ferrer that they did for that movie. It's about this journalist who is after this pseudo-vampire of sorts. Popsy is about this kid who's going to be kidnapped, and then something crazy happens and kind of ties into The Night Flyer a little bit. You Know They Got a Hell of a Band is another great one that was on the Nightmares and Dreamscapes, both in the book and in the series, and it's about driving through Oregon and finding this town that has a bunch of dead rock stars in it. And it's like a weird portal to the you know where, the otherworldly realms of sorts. So that's where I can't really mention much else from Everything's Eventual, aside from the ones that, you know, 1408, Little Sisters, Everything's Eventual, that I've mentioned already. Just After Sunset, though, a few other awesome ones. Harvey's Dream is about this guy who has this horrible nightmare that his daughter gets killed, and it's kind of prophetic. The Things They Left Behind is about this guy who worked at the World Trade Center and like got out ahead of time, and he's being haunted by the ghost. That's why I'm saying that the post 9/11 America hung so heavily over Just After Sunset, and since I distinctively remember just how the world changed when that happened, I mean, for my generation, you know, being in my early 30s and stuff now, that is like basically when JFK got killed type thing. And so King's writing, I feel like, took on so much more of a profound manner, and the things they left behind is creepy and crazy. Graduation Afternoon is about a nuclear attack finally happening from terrorists. It's, oh man, it's nuts. It's very short but very good. New York Times at bargain rates is another great one about this woman who's getting phone calls from her husband who died in 9/11. And so Just After Sunset and Night Shift, as you can tell, have predominantly dominated this video. A few others from Bizarre Bad Dreams, though, to mention. My Lady 1 is another crazy story that started out as an ebook about a car. Damn, is it good. It's kind of another car eating people one, and I liked it better than Christine. It's right there with From a Buick 8 for, you know, King stuff that I absolutely adore. Is another one, U-R. It's about this guy who gets a crazy Kindle, which is from like another dimension. There's Lomentines with the Dark Tower. It's about him reading futuristic things potentially happening, and you know, it's good, it's good, it's good. Lastly, Summer Thunder, the story that closes out Bizarre Bad Dreams, is about the nuclear war has happened and people are dying of radiation poisoning, and it's about this guy and his dog and his neighbor, and it's slow moving, it's sad, and man, Stephen King, what a career and what a year thus far. I have to thank him very much for, you know, a grande gracias to El Rey here on Hail to Stephen King, and obviously to all of you guys tuning into this program. I think this might have gone much longer than I anticipated, but I just wanted to give you guys some shout outs about all of the different short stories that I love. I know I talked about way more than 10 or even 11, but nonetheless, maybe with my recommendations here, you can decide which collections of shorts you want to gravitate towards first, even if it's not Night Shift or Just After Sunset, which are my two personal recommendations, but they're all good, and there is merit within them all. So I have been Jaime Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors at Jaime Fuego, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Fuegotainment relaunch coming very, very soon in my birthday month of September. So look forward to that, guys. And obviously, thanks very much for tuning in here on The Horror Show, where you can find me on all the regular programming weekly. And yeah, I guess until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, fellow constant readers, hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope that it is sooner rather than later. And until that comes around, stay scared and read Stephen King. Short or long form, it's all good.